I know there's apologies from Councillor Mandy Owen. Any other apologies to note today? All other Cabinet members are here, which takes us to agenda item 3, which is declarations of interest. Della.
Thank you, Leader. I'm aware of 2 interests today. The Leader is a council-appointed trustee of Torfaen Leisure Trust. That's a personal interest only, and that's in relation to agenda item 10, the energy improvement project at the TLT site. So if I could ask you, Leader, to confirm that.
I confirm that, thank you.
Thank you. And the other interest is Councillor David Daniels is a council-appointed governor at Maindy Primary School, and that's in relation to agenda item number 9, replacement Maindy Primary School. That's a personal interest only. If I could ask Councillor Daniels to confirm that.
Thanks, Delith. Yeah, that's correct.
Thank you, Leader. I'm not aware of any other interests.
Thank you, Delith. Any other interests, members? No? Okay, we'll move on to minutes from the 12th of July, which is agenda item 4. It's minutes of the Cabinet meeting on the 12th of July. Any matters arising from those? If not, is everyone happy to agree those as a true and accurate record? That's agreed. Thank you. Agenda item 5, then, updates on actions. Any updates to note today? I see there's a note on the timings and budget issues, but we'll deal with that in agenda item 6. So if we're all happy to move on then to agenda item 6, which is the financial forecast 22-23 and budget update for 2023-24. So over to Sue first.
Thank you, Leader. So the report that I'm introducing outlines the initial 2022-23 budget forecast at Q1 using the June 2022 monitoring. Looking at the report and the position in relation to the anticipated outturn, we've got an initial forecast here of a potential underspend of around 5.5 million against our net budget of 209 million. Excuse me. I just wanted to take the opportunity to comment on this report and what it tells us about how the council manages its finances. The first thing that struck me is that it shows that the council takes a very considered approach to its financial management. Yes, we're in very challenging times and we shouldn't underestimate the potential impacts of those challenges as we're going forward, and being mindful that things can change adversely in the current climate is a very wise thing to do. But I believe that we're navigating a really steady course through these difficulties. I think we're demonstrating sound forecasting, we're demonstrating prudent budgeting, and looking at the timetable for developing the budget, a timetable that includes appropriate engagement and real reflection and consideration. I think that clear, calm financial management is a tribute to the way that resources are managed in the authority, and I would contrast that with the chaotic response to the cost of living that's being seen in Westminster. And I think we should take appropriate levels of pride in the clear, calm financial management that we do have. Despite rampant inflation and pay awards that are higher than anticipated, our approach has put us in a much better position than most councils across Wales and pretty much all of them in England. The fact that our pay awards are deliverable without impact on existing services is a real testimony to that approach. That spend is in line with capital budgets despite these enormous pressures, again, another tribute. And I think the financial discipline that is holding across spending lines to enable us to be forecasting a £500,000 underspend is remarkable in these circumstances. So I would like to put on record my thanks to the team, to Nigel and his team. The other thing I'd like to say quickly, though, is that this is also a courageous council in its use of resources. We don't sit on excessive levels of reserves, we don't hoard resources, and we are prepared to take well-managed risks. And I think that is really important, because we are we are passionate about the support that we want to give to our businesses and to our communities, to families in Torfaen, not just now, but into the future and the future generations. So that courage has to be in evidence. If we're going to have a fairer and a greener Torfaen going forward, we can't be making any apology for investing in that future, in protecting the vulnerable, but also in meeting the needs to move away from dependence on fossil fuels and the big oil and gas producers. And we can't shy away from directing the resources to the food and fuel banks that are proving a lifeline to so many. And I think, again, the way that we're approaching financial management is enabling us to do this. And although the challenges remain and there's so much more that we want to do, this Council cares. And while others in other places are talking of trickling down, we are determined to offer a hand up. Thank you.
Thank you, Sue. Nigel?
Thank you, Leader. As the Executive Member said, this report outlines the forecast at Q1, £500,000 spent. The reasons are in the report. They're quite well articulated. There are particular pressures within neighbourhood services, but all the other services are there or thereabouts. And I would say in relation to neighbourhoods, they're probably hit hardest by inflation, in terms of catering costs, and obviously the recovery from the pandemic in terms of income levels. Obviously, with the passage of time since this report was originally going to come, we've obviously got month 5, and month 5 has improved slightly again. So our trajectory is solid. And all chief officers have, always look to maintain discipline in terms of managing their budgets. There's a bit in the report on the achievement of mitigations, and that's another positive picture. And as the Executive Member said, we've got an approach to managing pay. Largely, I think, down to the decisions you as Cabinet recommended to Council as part of the March budget in terms of not spending recurrently all of the settlement that was there before us. It does carry an opportunity cost, but we're looking to provide that from reserves. But that certainly puts us into a good position. And it's vital, I think, going into 23-24, that we look to maintain at least that position and perhaps even try and improve it, so that we go into it as healthy as we can in terms of our financial standing. Pay is a real positive for us. Many authorities will be having to address that recurrently in the current year, but also so is things such as social care and the transformation in relation to children's services and the numbers coming down there. The budget process is outlined for 23-24. I think going forward things are going to get tougher. We know our forward indication is lower than it has been certainly this year, and we've got very high inflation. And high inflation and high pay inflation was not something that we saw when we were experiencing the austerity from 2010 onwards. There's a lot of noise in the system at the moment, so as the Executive Member says, we always try to take a calm approach, but I'm sure we'll have some difficult choices ahead as we move through the budget process. The only final point I would make is we do have a real concern, I think, around capital. We are seeing significant inflation in capital, which is putting pressure on capital schemes. And we are a relatively small authority. There's only really 3 sources of capital. That's, and funding, prudential borrowing, or capital receipts. And as a very small borough, our scope for the latter is significantly diminished. And we've already undertaken quite a lot of prudential borrowing. So capital is, probably as least a bigger concern as revenue, probably bigger, I would suggest, going forward. But in overall terms, we're in a very good position in 22-23, but as I say, largely or significantly helped, I think, by the decisions you recommended to Council in March.
Thanks, Nigel, and thanks, Sue. It's good to hear that, you know, the positive impact of those decisions coming through. Obviously, Sue especially mentioned the dilemma facing the services, you know, those services that show themselves to be so vital during the pandemic. Those services have pressures that need to be met. The costs in those services are rising just like everyone else costs are going up too. So I think it's vital that the right decisions are made at a UK government level to support those services going forwards. Otherwise, they'll continue to suffer, and both the people who work in them will suffer. And, you know, those are the people that we all clap for on a Thursday night. I think they deserve a decent future, and also the people that depend on those services as well. So and that's the challenge that faces. But it's good to see that in the face of that challenge, on a local level, we've got that prudent, calm and careful approach that's enabling us to deliver this report today. Any other questions? Peter?
Thank you, Leader. I'd like to thank Sue and Nigel for this welcome report. Just one question, Nigel. We're hearing, you said noise in the system, there's a possibility coming from Westminster that austerity is going to return. Is there any noise coming up that this might delay the Welsh Government provisional settlement, which states December 2022? Because there's talk of we're going to have this financial statement from the UK Government in November. Timing seems a bit tight to me. I just wondered if you're picking up any messages from the Welsh Government on that.
Not at the moment. The last update we had from Judith Cole in Welsh Government was that they are anticipating being able to stick to that for December. And I think in their announcements they did say they were going to live within the spending commitments of the last spending review. You don't know whether that transpires. But no, they weren't anticipating any further delays. If you recall, we used to have our provisional settlements in October, of course. So December is quite late. But certainly the last time I spoke, they were fairly confident, unless they dramatically change their tack.
And that's the appeal we're making to them as a local government community in Wales to work with us to try and face up to the uncertainties and to give us the best possible chance of setting a positive budget for next year. So that joint working that stood us in good stead in Wales throughout the pandemic is something I think is vital as ever. Any questions? Okay, are we happy then to move to the recommendations on this report, which are at paragraph 6? It's recommended that we note the initial financial forecast for 2022-23, that we approve the funding proposal to address the potential impact of the National Employers' Final Pay Offer, and thirdly, that we note the proposed timetable for the construction and consideration of the initial 23-24 estimates and the revised medium-term financial plan. Everyone in agreement? I believe that's carried unanimously. Thank you very much. Okay, so thank you, Nigel, thank you, Sue. If we move to agenda item 7, which is the Recycling, Waste and Fleet report, and hand over to Rachel.
Thank you, Leader. This report is to note the decision that was made in August to continue the improvement in the recycling and waste service. In December last year, the Council supported through investment the purchasing of temporary vehicles and additional staffing to help improve the dry recycling service. So to remind members, dry recycling is our paper, card, plastic and cans. This stabilised the service while we wait for the new fleet to arrive. The new fleet in time will also collect the materials I just mentioned, as well as food and card. Food and card is collected separately on separate bespoke vehicles, and it had been hoped that the food and card vehicles would last until the new fleet arrived, but this has proved impossible. The food and card vehicles were at the end of life and were causing considerable strain on the service, its reliability and therefore impact on the public. In August, a report was put before the executive members for Resources and Environment, which requested a approval for the following strategy: that garden waste was suspended for 2 weeks to allow the crew and fleet to prioritise and card collections to catch up, the hiring of 8 additional vehicles, 4 of which would be for 1 year and 4 for a 2-year period, that 6 of the vehicles came off an approved framework, but 2 required exemptions as the company identified with availability, because these are not easy vehicles to come by, was not on an existing approved list or framework, and to recruit the associated staff, which was 3 additional HGV drivers and 6 loaders, and that we extended garden waste as a gesture of goodwill to our customers. And that strategy means that the service is now stable, and hopefully you'll have seen an improvement out there for your customers, for your residents. The report outlined the financial implications with an investment required this year of £351,000, £324,000 in 23-24 and £51,000 in 24-25. Paragraph 6 of the report outlines the financial strategy, which includes using in-year budget or headroom within the service and department's budget, and then supported through corporate reserve. For future years, it will be built into the MTFP process, but we also recognise that this is also temporary funding. In terms of the wider alignment to the strategy that was approved by Cabinet and Council in January of this year, with the creation of a single pass fleet and a single drop-off transfer station, the service remains committed to this being delivered. The reason for the longer-term hire for the food and card fleet in this report allows that strategy to be fully realised over the next 2 years, as work continues on the route optimisation to allow the streams to be added onto the single pass vehicles and the upgrades to the preferred recycling facility to enable the receipt of food waste. A report on this strategy is due to come before Cabinet soon, with then further reports to follow after scrutiny in January on how the Council aims to achieve the 70% recycling rate and ensure that Welsh Government targets are achieved in the future. To ensure the service could move quickly and secure the vehicles, the report also requested that the decision was implemented immediately and requested the removal of the call-in procedure. This is allowed under the Constitution, and approval was granted. By way of an update, 6 of the vehicles have arrived, as have all of the staff. 2 of the vehicles we knew would take slightly longer, but they are the ones that are needed for the longer two-year term strategy. I'm pleased to report that as a result, the performance has improved, and given the fleet, we now should have stability for the future, whilst we wait also for the new dry recycling vehicles to come in, they should all be in by March of next year. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks for that summary, Rachel. Any questions? Yes, I think that the updates that you've given are very welcome. It's certainly something that we recognise as the challenge to provide that efficient service for residents whilst also meeting the recycling targets. So that's very welcome. We would welcome continued updates as this moves forward. Any other questions? The recommendations then that Cabinet notes A, the strategy for stabilising services, including the suspension of garden waste for 1 collection per household, the hire of vehicles as outlined in the recruitment of staff, and I'd like to thank residents for bearing with us during that suspension period for garden waste to enable that to take place. Secondly, that we note that the financial strategy and use of service budget and corporate reserves is outlined in section 6. Thirdly, that the decision was implemented before the process of challenge. And
it's frozen for me too. I don't know about you.
Because implementation was required urgently to ensure strategy could be implemented in line with the timescales proposed.
Yeah, I wasn't entirely certain then. It seemed like he was just...
Hello?
I don't know what's going on now.
Sorry?
It's got to be them if we can all see and talk to each other.
Hi, Fiona. David, can you hear us?
Patiently wait.
I think the feed may have frozen.
Yeah, it looks like we've lost connection with us, doesn't it? Judging by their conversation.
Oh, right. And lastly, that we approve that garden waste collections are extended for a further month until the 2nd of December as a gesture of goodwill to make up for the 2-week disruption. Are we all happy to agree that one? That's carried.
I think they froze on that. I think they froze.
Okay. We've just got a bit of a freeze on the people joining us remotely. In the meantime, if we move then to agenda item 8, which is the Highway Asset Management Plan, if I hand over to Rachel to outline this report.
Apologies, you've got a bit of me today. So this report before you today seeks approval for the mid-life update to the Highways Asset Management Plan. And just by way of background, the HAMP, as we call it, describes how the Council reacts to and records reports of highway safety issues, assesses the condition of any given part of the highway network, and uses data to evidence the allocation of funding. And the HAMP ensures that we act appropriately, uses resources effectively, and that customers are also given a fair and consistent service. The HAMP was approved in 2019 following a strategic review, but it is important these documents are kept alive under constant review and take account of emerging changes in practice, guidance or legislation, so it's constantly reviewed, particularly with involvement from the team and our highways inspectors. In the background section of the report, it gives the data on the current condition of our A, B and C network against the amount of resources invested into the network. And this is shown improvement, which evidences the criteria within the HAMP is working and resources are being applied appropriately. The midlife update proposes amendments in four areas, and these are outlined in detail in paragraph 4.10 of the report. But at a high level, these are a change to the mode of street inspections, a change to the ability of highway inspectors to request an increased inspection frequency, inclusion of traffic flow data, and early warning that the proposed 20 miles an hour may have consequential impacts on scheduled inspection frequencies, and that Welsh Government advised that reduction in speed will lower the safety risk, and therefore we can review our inspection routine and also the degradation due to usage. As the HAMP was approved by Cabinet, this midlife update requires the same level of approval. A new HAMP will be reviewed over the next 3 years, with a new version being presented in good time for adoption by the service in 2025. Therefore, happy to commend this report and the updated HAMP to Cabinet, and happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Rachel. Any questions, colleagues, on this? I had a question about, I see the table in 3.9, and I think that's the crux of the dilemma we all face as councils with sort of finite resources for highways, is that obviously the advice we get is to focus on roads with the highest speed and the highest volumes of traffic, which will be the A, B and C roads. And you can see in that table at 3.9 that actually the percentage of principal A roads in overall poor condition has dropped from 2.48% in 2018 to 1.7% in 2022, that the proportion of B roads in poor condition has dropped from 4.77% in 2018 to 2.4% now, and the C road proportion in overall poor condition has dropped from 4.4% to 3.2%. Now, I suspect that many members of the public will sort of scoff at that a little bit, but that may be based on their experiences outside their own homes, which are in unclassified roads. It's inevitable, I guess, that if we prioritise the highest speed and highest volume roads for both safety and other things, that it's the back roads, the residential roads that are unclassified that will no doubt suffer. But I guess if you try to flip it the other way around, you'd have more accidents caused by potholes and things. And I guess it's how we try and work out how to do things like the paths and pavements within many streets, especially in the new town, for example, in Cwmbran, whilst also trying to keep those A, B and C roads in good condition for safety reasons. The other question would be, the question we often ask is how we compare to other areas. I experienced this myself as a cyclist on narrow, high tyres that shake you about if you hit any potholes. What's our experience of road conditions in other areas? Because certainly I find when you go over the border into England, the state of roads, including classified roads, deteriorates considerably.
I think the first one is the challenge you have outlined, particularly for the allocation of the resources. The HAMP does take us in a process of prioritisation, as you say, particularly based on traffic data, safety in particular, and identifying where our key risks, particularly if you think that our key network, particularly the A, isn't just used by not the cars, but it's used by school transport, by bus, by freight, etc. for main distribution through the borough. Hence, it will be maintained to that level of standard, which would be higher than what would be out, in a residential area. I think, over the lifetime of the next few years, that can be reviewed, but it's recognising that with those resources that we have, if the prioritisation was changed, then you would start to see a decline. And therefore, in terms of then exposing the council to that level of risk, and the report does go into detail, particularly in the background section, about the success we've had so far with insurance on repudiation rates because of the HAMP. And actually, it's been, it was before I started, but I was told that earlier, before the adoption of the HAMP, the authority had quite a high rate of insurance claims against it because, I see Nigel nodding, because we didn't have that regime in place, which was then defendable in court against the council. So that's something we just have to bear in mind as we review the HAMP. In terms of road conditions elsewhere, we're pretty comparable with our Welsh counterparts. We don't have the data from England to do those comparisons. It is only by what we may see as a cyclist or as a driver on the road.
Thanks. I guess there's an issue of how we communicate there, that we have a finite resource and that we have to use it where safety dictates. And I guess we're always on the look for different potential sort of solutions and innovations in highways. I read a lot about sort of recycled plastic surfacing that's being used elsewhere, and just if there are any other issues, can we always be on the lookout for any potential opportunities to try and deal with those roads that otherwise don't get done. I'm also really keen to continue talking to our neighbouring council to see if there are any other sort of models that we could use to get more bang for our buck when it comes to surfacing. Because I read in the report somewhere, I can't work at which paragraph, there's a considerable amount of money that we invest in road resurfacing. Here we are, it's at the bottom of 3.9, I think, isn't it? A total of £2.384 million this year, 1.975 last year, 1.7 the year before, 2 million the year before that, 1.3 million the year before that. It's a considerable investment in highways, and how do we always make sure we're getting the best value for money for that?
Yeah, thank you. I think, as you said, you've hit the... it's constantly trying to look at the different procurement options moving forward. And we've had discussions about that in the past. Over time, as austerity is hit, then councils have moved to a more contracted model with having an in-house reactive small workforce. But then for the major reconstruction works, the amount of kit, nighttime working, etc., authorities on their own, just particularly for that value of money, it's not, it's not cost effective for us to invest in that level of kit, and hence why there is now that more contracting way of working across the board. And I have discussed this with my counterparts to see if there is attractiveness in doing things differently. I think one of the things we do have is you'll see that Welsh Government funding is not consistent. In terms of we don't have a long-term view from Welsh Government on grant. This year you can see it's a zero, and we're not anticipating anything to come forward next year either. So it's always been one which has been very much lobby-based, and sometimes quite often end of year, because this is one area we can normally spend against, because we have schemes in the pipeline, because we know what's always next on our list to do. So if we could have consistency from Welsh Government in that, it would greatly help us be able to package bigger contracts or different delivery models would help.
Thanks, and thank you for those responses. And can you please pass my thanks to Highways officers? Because I know they're a small team who work very hard, and they've got people like me who are continually nagging them about different schemes and about different ways of working, so I appreciate the work they do. Any other questions, colleagues? We can move then to the recommendation, that's paragraph 8, that we approve the midlife updated HAMP for the adopted Highway 2019-2025 as council policy. A show of hands for that one. Great. That's carried. Thank you very much, Rachel. We're then on to agenda item 9, which is Maindy School. David Daniels' personal interest has been noted. If I hand over initially to Richard and then to Rachel on this.
This is just to give Rach a bit of respite for having so many reports today, and in the absence of Mandy, and now my screen's gone. That's wonderful. Just to say, by way of introduction, this is the contractual phase for the construction of the Maindy site, the first passive house school within the borough, which should have net zero carbon result. It should have come to Cabinet a few weeks ago, but sadly with the demise of Her Majesty the Queen, Cabinet was cancelled. The matter was time of the essence, and the Chief Executive, in consultation, made the decision. So we're asked today to note and affirm the decision of the Chief Executive. There are some slight cost increases from when this was originally concerned, and from memory it's 4.3, but forgive me if it's somewhere else because my screen has gone. And those are explained there largely due to abnormalities on the site being more difficult than we originally anticipated, and secondly the highly inflated construction industry that we're well rehearsed with other projects in and about the area. So that's all I wanted to say. So if the Chief Officer's got breath, I'll let her carry on.
There's nothing further to add. Councillor Clark did it brilliantly. Thank you.
Thanks, Richard. Any questions on this report? Obviously welcome the construction of a new primary school. It's always a good thing to give first-class facilities to our young people learning, and also to welcome the net zero you mentioned there. If we're going to build new buildings, I think it's incumbent on us as a council that's declared a climate emergency to make sure they're not only fit for the future educational purposes, but also sustainable and play a part in our carbon reduction efforts as well. Any more questions? The recommendations then are at paragraph 11, that we note and endorse the decision made by the Chief Executive on the 20th of September for the award of the contract. Show of hands. That's carried. Thank you very much, colleagues. So we move on then to agenda item 10, which is the energy improvement project at Torvine Leisure Trust. I've already declared an personal interest as a council-appointed trustee. So if I hand over to Rachel again.
Yeah, again, this is a report to note, actually, as the decision to progress with the project needs to be made during the official mourning period for Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, when all council business was suspended. The project actually came to Cabinet earlier in the year, but due to significant volatility in the market and also change to some of the project parameters, it is being resubmitted. In essence, the project looks to upgrade significant infrastructure on the Torvine Leisure Trust estate, and the details attached in Appendix 1 should also add that much of this infrastructure is ones that remain the council's responsibility for the capital upgrade. So it's also for benefit for ourselves as well as for TLT, and also as part of our climate emergency. The work covers 5 of the TLT sites and now comes to a value of just over £1 million. It was about £700,000, and hence given, and again this is all down to volatility in the market and price of the photovoltaics, etc., that it needs to therefore come back because there wasn't approval for such project increase escalation when we first submitted to Cabinet. Just as a reminder, TLT can't access SALEX funding It's got to come to a public body, so the council will enter into the SALEX agreements, and then the report gives approval for the council to work through the Leisure Partnership Board to agree the terms and conditions, and to then agree with TLT to ensure the loan is paid back from the savings generated by the project. Due to the market prices now, though, the payback period is now forecast at 4.5 years, whereas previously it was about a 7-year payback period. So again, it just shows that in some ways the project delay has helped. The decision, again, like Maindy, needs to be made during the morning period with urgency, as the prices quoted were only for a time-limited period. Again, this was the Chief Executive did in consultation with members. This is a significant project, clearly of £1 million, so will be now run through the new Programme Management Office methodology. And we're talking to the officers in the project plan. Certain parts of the project will be added on to existing projects. The school's PV project tender, for example, is going to include the PV tender for these sites, so again, making that more attractive. The lighting for PALC has gone out for a mini competition, so we're on a good way forward in terms of getting those contracts in place. So the work should all be completed by the end of 2023. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, colleagues. Any questions? This seems to me to be a bit of a no-brainer, both in terms of cost reductions and in terms of reduction in CO2 emissions too. We're all happy to accept then the recommendations, which are at paragraph 8, that we note and endorse the Chief Executive approved proposed energy improvement project, approve the TCBC secure the SALEX loan on behalf of Torvine Leisure Trust to enable the project to progress, subject to us entering into agreement with Torvine Leisure Trust for the repayment of the loan. Such terms to be agreed in conjunction with the Leisure Partnership Board and the Council legal term. And lastly, that it was agreed that the decision being before the process of challenging Corrian has been completed in accordance with paragraph 5.15.9 of the Constitution, because the decision was required urgently for reasons set out in paragraph 4.5 above. We're all happy to approve that. Great, thank you, colleagues. That closes today's Cabinet. Thank you very much to officers and members for reporting, especially Rachel for a marathon session. Take care.